When the famous 18th century writer, Dr. Johnson, said that if a man was tired of London, he was tired of life, he could not have spoken a truer word. And he was talking about the London that he knew back in the 1700s. Buckingham Palace was just a house. There was no underground. Big Ben had not yet been cast, and it would be getting on for 100 years before Harrods was ready to open its doors for business. It's hard to imagine what the good doctor would make of today's London, with its multicultural society and wealth of exciting attractions. But one thing's for certain, he would face exactly the same difficulty that we do now at the start of this whistle-stop tour. Where on earth, or more precisely, where in London do we begin? For the majority of visitors to London, wherever in the world they come from, their first port of call is invariably Buckingham Palace, the official London residence of the present British monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. The imposing splendour of the East Front is the view that's best known, overlooking the broad, elegant sweep of the Mall, and at times of great national celebration, or for that matter, of ceremonial public mourning, the citizens of Britain will gather here to share together and experience a real sense of community spirit. However, Buckingham Palace has been a relatively recent addition to the royal property collection when compared, for instance, with the 11th century Tower of London. Starting out as a fine townhouse built for the Duke of Buckingham in 1703, the property attracted the attention of King George III, who was on the lookout for a London residence to replace St James's Palace, with which he was evidently none too enamoured, describing the London home of today's Prince of Wales as a dust trap. Unfortunately, ill health prevented George III from improving his purchase. He suffered from the degenerative disease porphyria, which gave every impression of madness, and little was done with Buckingham House until George IV succeeded him as king. The incoming sovereign commissioned his favourite architect, John Nash, to turn the elegant townhouse into a stylish palace. The work took 27 years to complete, by which time George IV had died, been succeeded by his brother William IV, who, in his turn, had also died, to be succeeded by his niece Queen Victoria, who was the first British monarch to reside at Buckingham Palace. The East Front that you see today was remodelled with Portland stone in the early years of the 20th century, at the same time as the creation of the Mall and the Victoria Monument, all the handiwork of Sir Aston Webb. Most of the year, visitors have to content themselves with viewing the palace through these famous gates, where proclamations of royal importance, such as births, engagements and forthcoming marriages, traditionally get posted. When the Queen is in residence, the royal standard flies resplendent, and during the summer months, the colourful changing of the guard ceremony is a daily event. Only in recent years have the state rooms of Buckingham Palace been opened to the public through August and September, which has proved extremely popular with visitors, and a wander around to the Royal Mews, again only open in August and September, offers a delightful opportunity to view the Queen's horses and coaches used by the royal family on state occasions. To step back in time further, many visitors to London today will delight in discovering Kensington Palace, a much older royal residence. When Diana, Princess of Wales, died in 1997, the gates of Kensington Palace became a focal point for the thousands of mourners who flocked to the nation's capital to pay their respects. Bouquets and posies turned these gardens into a meadow of flowers for the much-loved princess, who'd lived here in her own royal apartments. Kensington Palace actually dates back to 1605, and when William III and Queen Mary bought it in 1689, Sir Christopher Wren, the architect famous for remodelling St Paul's Cathedral after the Great Fire of London, was commissioned to convert it into a royal palace. Visitors are admitted all year round, and the highlights of the tour include beautiful staterooms and an exhibition of court dress dating back to the 18th century. Some important royal events have taken place at Kensington Palace, not least the death of Queen Anne in 1714 from a most unfortunate fit of apoplexy due to overeating. The palace, however, is better known as having been the birthplace of Queen Victoria, who on the 20th of June 1837 at 5 a.m. in the morning was woken from her slumbers to be told that her uncle, William IV, had died, and that she, an 18-year-old princess, had succeeded him to the British throne. It's not only the palace that draws visitors to this most beautiful part of London, as the former grounds have been open as a public park since 1841. Kensington Gardens are synonymous with Peter Pan, J.M. Barrie's whimsical creation of a little boy that never grew up. Today's children still enjoy outings to the park, and Sir George Frampton's 1912 statue of Peter Pan is a popular stopping-off point. But if it's ancient royal history you're looking for, then the Tower of London has to be high on the sightseeing agenda. William the Conqueror, as any history teacher will tell you, made his name at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, defeating King Harold to take the English throne. Upon reaching London, he built a simple timber and earth castle, and by 1100 the White Tower, so named because during the Middle Ages it was regularly whitewashed, had been erected. This impressive walled fortress became the main royal residence of all English kings until the reign of Henry VIII, some 400 years later. However, it was during Henry's time that the Tower became a place most definitely to be feared and avoided at all cost. During the late 13th century, King Edward I built a grand water gate so that access could be gained from the River Thames. But during Tudor times, this gateway was used for far more sinister purposes. It was from this point onwards that the Tower's main function was that of a prison, and this entrance became known as Traitor's Gate. Few that passed this way ever emerged from the Tower alive, and if sufficiently favoured, They were beheaded privately within these walls. Unpleasant as this may have been, the less fortunate were taken to Tower Hill, where they were publicly executed in front of the ghoulish crowds of bloodthirsty Londoners. Interestingly, only 7 people were executed inside the Tower of London, including Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, 2 of the 6 wives of Henry VIII. However, it's thought that at least 50,000 families had reason to mourn relatives that Henry VIII had ordered to be put to death. For today's visitors, the Tower is one of London's more expensive attractions, but there are a whole host of fascinating treasures to see, including the crown jewels. So do make sure you've enough time to do the Tower justice, and perhaps more importantly, get your money's worth. And of course, while you're in the area, taking a closer look at Tower Bridge is an absolute must. Although castellated and equally as grand as the Tower of London itself, this flamboyant example of top-notch engineering was not built until the end of the 19th century. It's amazing to think that the 1894 winding machinery that operates the bridge today electrically actually used the original Victorian steam engine up until 1974 for the raising and lowering of this most famous of London's roads. If the weather's fine and you're in no rush, a climb up the 300 steps to the top of the tower will give you an interesting view of London from the catwalk, but only advisable if you've a good head for heights. Having encountered Henry VIII at the Tower of London, this is as good a time as any to look at another of this charismatic king's contributions to London life. One of the great joys and delightfully free pleasures for visitors to Britain's capital city is the sheer number of green spaces and parks that are open to the public, and many were cultivated by Henry VIII for his sporting pleasures. A fantastic 67 square miles of Greater London is dedicated to Parkland, making this one of the greenest city centres in the world. And Hyde Park is very probably the most famous of them all, due to that bastion of the democratic process and free speech, Speaker's Corner. In 1872, a law was passed allowing anyone to assemble an audience and speak freely about any topic of their choice, right, wrong or indifferent. Ever since that time, this sacred corner of Hyde Park has been renowned for everything from the spectacular orator to the, quite frankly, verbose eccentric. Sunday is traditionally the most popular day for speakers, and there are usually plenty of spectators to heckle the outlandish and have their say in this democratic exchange. However, Henry VIII would undoubtedly have whisked away the vast majority of these speakers to the Tower for summary execution, so it's rather ironic that it is he who was ultimately responsible for the creation of this park. All of this land, the ancient manor of Hyde, once belonged to Westminster Abbey, but when Henry VIII broke away from the Catholic Church in Rome to divorce his first wife and marry Anne Boleyn, monasterial property took rather a bashing. In this period of history, known more technically as the Reformation, Henry seized the parkland for himself and thoroughly enjoyed hunting it in style. By the 17th century, King James I had opened the park to the public, and it was a very popular civic act, which is still appreciated by native Londoners and tourists alike. Not that it's always been quite so peaceful here, as this was once a notorious haunt for highwaymen, and many a duel was fought across this grassy expanse in the early morning mists, when pistols at dawn were considered to be the only honourable way to settle an argument. Moving eastwards, just a little way, will bring you to Green Park, another of Henry VIII's favourite hunting grounds. Adjoining Green Park, across the Mall, is St James's Park, which was a large marshy bog until Henry VIII decided that it was well worth cultivating to increase his hunting country. However, it was the later monarch, King Charles II, who actually remodelled both Green Park and St James's for the public to enjoy, including a magnificent aviary along the southeastern edge of St James's Park. Although you'll still find an array of bird life in the park today, it's made up predominantly of ducks and geese, rather than anything more exotic. And as the stylish aviary has long since been consigned to the history books, the only other reminder of its existence is Birdcage Walk, the street where this once famous landmark stood. As well as being the major centre for the British monarchy, London is also the hub of the nation's government, with the Houses of Parliament and Big Ben being very high on the sightseers' agenda. Although the institutions of the Houses of Lords and the Commons have been in operation since 1512 at the Palace of Westminster, the buildings that are so familiar today only actually date back to the 1840s, when they were rebuilt after fire destroyed all but Westminster Hall of the original ancient buildings. Sir Charles Barry and Augustus Pugin redesigned this mock Gothic structure full of pomp and circumstance, where the business of government could continue undaunted. Fire again caused disruption in 1941, when during a World War II air raid, the Commons debating chamber was completely gutted. But as before, rebuilding was swift, and this time the work was courtesy of Giles Gilbert Scott. If you want to see inside the Houses of Parliament for yourself, there are public galleries in both the Lords and the Commons that are open for visitors at specific times. So it's worth checking things out if you'd like a really unique experience that's absolutely free. But for many, the favourite attraction here is Big Ben. And although most people think of this as the huge four-faced clock in the 320-foot tower, Big Ben is in point of fact the huge bell contained within. The clock has kept perfect time for the nation since May 1859, when it was first set in motion, and its deep, resonant chimes have become a comforting reminder of Great Britain all over the world. Moving from the Houses of Parliament northwards through Whitehall, you'll soon find yourself at the entrance to Downing Street, where British Prime Ministers have been in residence since 1732. Number 10 is officially the home of the Prime Minister, and number 11 is the official residence of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. But it's no longer possible to get any closer than these heavily guarded gates, which were erected for security reasons in 1989. So far, we've seen plenty of ceremonial grandeur, and as much a part of London's stately pageantry as the palaces, parks, and parliamentary paraphernalia are the dignified religious institutions that are such an integral part of the city's landscape. Literally a stone's throw from the Houses of Parliament stands the ancient and glorious Westminster Abbey, where a place of worship has been in existence since the 7th century. Construction of this magnificent building, as you see it today, began with Edward the Confessor in the 11th century. Since 1066, with just 2 exceptions, every English monarch has been crowned here, and the majority of royal weddings have taken place within the abbey. You'll also find many royal personages buried here in sacred tombs, including some notable medieval characters in St Edward's Chapel, where the magnificent 14th century coronation chair takes pride of place. Other attractions include Poets' Corner, where there are memorials to such literary giants as William Shakespeare and Charles Dickens, and the Tomb of the Unknown Warrior, where an unnamed soldier from World War I is actually buried, in honour of the thousands lost in that terrible conflict who were never recognised with the dignity of a formal resting place. Up until the Reformation, and Henry VIII's break with the Pope and the Church of Rome, the Catholic faith was followed here. But since that time, Westminster Abbey has been at the very heart of the Church of England. However, Westminster today is also the district graced with the foremost Roman Catholic church in England, the stunningly dramatic Westminster Cathedral. This early 20th century treasure is an example of one of London's few Byzantine buildings by the architect John Francis Bentley. Sadly, he never saw his masterpiece completed, as he died a year before it was finished. The stark contrast of red and white stone is quite remarkable, particularly with the 261-foot high tower, and the two styles of Westminster Abbey and Westminster Cathedral could not be more different. When it comes to great London churches, who could miss the wonderful St. Paul's Cathedral? And even if you only have a very short time to explore the city, this stunning cathedral is a must on anyone's itinerary. Just as fire completely reshaped the Houses of Parliament, St. Paul's has had to, on more than one occasion, rise phoenix-like from the ashes. The very first place of worship here was built in 604, but in 1087 it burnt down and was immediately replaced with a fine Norman stone cathedral. This edifice survived many centuries, but the Great Fire of London in 1666 reduced it to a burnt-out ruin. The lovely elegant building that you see today was designed by Sir Christopher Wren, who laid the foundation stone in 1675. However, it was his son who put the last stone in place, high up on the lantern, in 1708. There was much opposition to Wren's plans, but his determination eventually won the day. The characteristic dome is the second largest in the world, only beaten by the magnificent St. Peter's in Rome. Wren was 75 years old when he added the two west front towers, and both of them were supposed to have had clocks. But this has done nothing to deter admirers, and thousands of visitors come each year, with the Whispering Gallery high up in the dome proving to be extremely popular. As well as travelling upwards, if you can make the time, visit the crypt, where many national heroes are buried, and the tomb of Lord Nelson is particularly worthy of note. The last church that we're going to look at is a very different proposition, but equally as fascinating as London's great abbey and cathedrals. This is St. Martin in the Field, where a church has stood since the 13th century. James Gibbs completed the present-day building in 1726, and it has been of great architectural significance. This church was copied throughout America, where it became the main colonial style, particularly throughout the eastern seaboard, where the early British settlers landed. It's worth checking the lunchtime and evening concert programmes here, as there are some superb recitals, including a wide range of music to suit every taste. St. Martin's is also strongly associated with work for the homeless, since the crypt was opened as a shelter for displaced soldiers after World War I, and today the homeless will find a lunchtime soup kitchen here to at least provide a hot meal for those who experience the less glamorous side of London life. The one thing you can't fail to notice at St. Martin's is its absolutely fabulous location at the edge of Trafalgar Square. It was John Nash, the architect responsible for Buckingham Palace, that conceived the idea for the square, with construction taking place throughout the 1830s. Nelson's column is without doubt the most dominant feature, commemorating his heroic victory at the Battle of Trafalgar, which cost the great admiral his life. At the base of the column, the 4 beautiful lion statues are by Edward Landseer, a later addition from Queen Victoria's favourite artist. To the north of Trafalgar Square is the extremely imposing National Gallery, one of London's free attractions that has a great deal to offer the visitor. It was started by King George IV, who instigated the concept of a collection of paintings held in trust for the nation, and the main gallery building is in the typical neoclassical style of the period. There's been some controversy in more recent years over the 1991 edition of the Sainsbury wing, with modernistic, contemporary architecture. But whatever your views, the extra space is a definite bonus, and there are certainly more stunningly beautiful and historic paintings on display since the extension was built. While we're talking culture and national treasures, our next port of call has to be the great museums of London. And where better to start than at the British Museum, the oldest museum in the world, founded in 1753. Through the classical Greek portico, the visitor is lured back to ancient times. And thanks to the acquisitive natures of 18th and 19th century travellers, there's everything on display here, from ancient Egyptian mummies through to Chinese porcelain and centuries-old Shang bronzes. However, there's a fine line between collecting and plundering, and not all of the exhibits are without criticism. The Elgin marbles have caused quite a diplomatic problem since Lord Elgin removed them from the Parthenon in the early 19th century and sold them to the British nation. The modern-day government of Greece is still fighting to have the marbles returned, and negotiations will undoubtedly continue for some considerable time to come. If, after all the labyrinths of galleries and artefacts at the British Museum, you have the energy to continue in the same vein, the Victoria and Albert Museum, more affectionately termed the V&A, houses a wealth of diverse exhibits. The museum was founded in 1852 to inspire students of design with sculpture, furniture, ceramics, textiles and artwork from the far-flung corners of the British Empire. It was only on the death of her beloved husband Prince Albert that Queen Victoria renamed the museum, and there still remains to this day an air of the old colonial Victorian grandeur that both delights and disgusts by equal measure. The V&A stands in the Cromwell Road, where museums pose side by side in architectural splendour. You don't even need to step inside the Natural History Museum to realise that you're in for a fantastic experience, as the cathedral-like building is a remarkable work of art in itself. Designed by Alfred Waterhouse, the construction was pretty revolutionary in 1881, with an iron and steel framework supporting the great ornamental archways and galleries. The Natural History Museum is a firm favourite with children, as there's an absolutely fantastic dinosaur exhibition. And with the enormous skeleton of a Diplodocus greeting everyone immediately on entry, a fascinating time will be had by all. But be warned, it's very easy to lose track of time completely once you enter this building, so make sure you're not in a hurry if you really want to appreciate it. Don't think you've come to the end of the museums when you step back out into the glare of modern-day London. Tucked just around the corner is the entrance to the Science Museum, another great favourite with younger visitors. There's a wonderful variety of hands-on galleries designed especially with children in mind, and with exhibits featuring such treasures as Apollo 10, which took the American astronauts around the moon in 1969, a full-size steam train, and other major feats of engineering, as well as a whole range of medical history, meteorology, and even a view of the evolution of computer technology. There truly is something here for everyone. Again, this is not an attraction that you can visit in brief, so if you're going to come here, give yourself plenty of time. The quality of the exhibits demand nothing less. After such a large dose of culture, you do no doubt feel in need of a little light relief, and what could be better for the overtaxed brain than a spot of retail therapy? London today is one of the finest shopping centres in the world, and for most people, Harrods, at the heart of Knightsbridge, is as famous a London landmark as Buckingham Palace. This fine building, probably London's most famous department store, was opened by Henry Charles Harrod in the 19th century. In fact, the Harrods Empire has rather humble beginnings as a small grocery store on the nearby Brompton Road. But Henry Harrod concentrated on good quality merchandise and an exceptionally high standard of service, which, as you see today, certainly gave the entrepreneurial grocer plenty of scope for expansion. There was a time when it was claimed that Harrods could supply absolutely anything, from a tiny packet of pins to a huge live elephant. And although you won't find a wild animal department here today, the range of high-quality stock is still pretty phenomenal. However, prices are also at the top end of the market. There are a staggering 300 departments and at least 4,000 members of staff, all of which are required when Harrods has its cut-price winter and summer sales. People will queue all night to be the first to the bargains, which is fine in July, but can be quite remarkable when you think how cold London can be in January. Equally as fascinating as Harrods is Liberty's, an amazing department store on fashionable Regent Street that you could be forgiven for thinking had stood here for centuries. Arthur Lazenby Liberty opened a shop selling Oriental silks in 1875, which proved very popular with London's 19th century artistic set. Quickly, he progressed to printing his own fabrics with designs from such great artists as William Morris, and Liberty prints are still very popular to this day. This mock Tudor black and white building only dates back to 1925, and it was designed and purpose-built for Liberty. The present-day store has many varied departments, but the Oriental theme is still strong, and particularly at Christmas time there are wonderful ranges of gifts available, often arts and craft-based, and utterly unique. London's status as one of the major fashion capitals of the world was at its height during the 1960s, when Mary Quant created the miniskirt, and the new teenage generation gave the notion of swinging and flower power a whole new meaning. This is Carnaby Street, which in the 60s was at the centre of swinging London, to such a degree that the Oxford English Dictionary admitted Carnaby Street to its hallowed pages as a noun meaning fashionable clothing for young people. Today, Carnaby Street is rather run down and lacks the magic of that colourful bygone age. But tourists from all over the world still enjoy coming here, and you'll most certainly find it to be as busy as it ever was. If Carnaby Street style has fallen into decline over the latter decades of the 20th century, by contrast, Covent Garden is definitely in the ascendancy. Once the fruit, vegetable and flower market of London that only came to life at night when the traders went about their business, Covent Garden has undergone a complete transformation. Classy small shops and craft stalls display their wares, with street entertainers adding a unique atmosphere to this now lovely part of London. But don't imagine that just because the nocturnal trade has gone, Covent Garden has lost its nightlife. This is one of the most popular spots for restaurants and bars. And of course, it's impossible to miss the stunning Royal Opera House, which is also the home of the Royal Ballet. Not everyone has a taste for ballet or opera, and popular theatre offers a somewhat less classical form of entertainment. When it comes to lavish stage productions, London is second to none. Perhaps it's the bright lights and the ornate architecture of some of the most beautiful theatres in the world that add an extra dimension to the experience. But the fact that there's a wide range of top-notch dramatic material on offer has to be the major attraction. Walk through Theaterland at night, Shaftesbury Avenue, the Haymarket or the Strand, and you'll find the sobering works of Beckett and Chekhov alongside the whimsy of Noel Coward and the extravaganza of the great musicals. If you happen to be in London at Christmas time for the pantomime season, you'll also see such traditional favourites as Jack and the Beanstalk, Cinderella, Peter Pan and Mother Goose lighting up the billboards in classic style. Ticket prices can be at a premium, particularly for new shows and the long-running old favourites. But a good tip is to head for the Leicester Square half-price ticket booth, where you can buy really cut-price tickets on the day for a whole range of performances. You may not get exactly the seats that you had in mind, but it's a great way to experience London theatre on a budget. It's impossible to think of British theatre in any shape or form without turning your attention to the nation's best-loved playwright, William Shakespeare, and he's certainly well represented in London. When Shakespeare left his hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon to try his luck in London, he quickly established himself as the foremost dramatist of the day, and accordingly was involved in the construction of the Globe, a theatre where his great works such as Hamlet, Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet could be performed. Unlike the comfortable, luxurious theatres that you'll sit in today, the Globe was open to the elements, and the noisy, volatile audience would not only boo and jeer if displeased, missiles of rotten fruit and vegetables, not to mention a few unidentified flying objects into the bargain, would be hurled without ceremony at all concerned. Shakespeare's original Globe burnt down, and what you're looking at here is a very recent recreation of Shakespeare's masterpiece. In the summer months, you can experience what Elizabethan theatre would have been like, with the works of Shakespeare being offered in their most authentic form. However, if this doesn't appeal, there's an exhibition in the Underglobe where aspects of the great bard's life are recreated in a most informative and entertaining way. Leaving behind theatrical entertainment, as we enter the closing phase of this programme, the last section will take you to some of the most interesting and unique London attractions that quite literally defy any other form of categorisation. This is Piccadilly Circus, a much-loved stopping-off point for many of London's visitors. For years, in the late 20th century, the distinctive statue of Eros, the Greek god of love, was boarded up. But fortunately, he's been restored in fine style to dominate the scene. Eros was created by Alfred Gilbert in 1892 as a memorial to the Earl of Shaftesbury, a great Victorian philanthropist who was responsible for easing the lot of children being forced to work in the appalling conditions of the Industrial Revolution. It's ironic, therefore, that for a great many young visitors to London, Piccadilly Circus is very definitely a favourite haunt. And with brightly coloured neon lights and flashing advertising hoardings, the atmosphere is positively electric. Should loud, fast, brash and extremely noisy be to your taste, then it's well worth calling in at the Trocadero, an entertainment complex which is an arcade gamer's heaven. But be warned, if you bring kids here, it's almost impossible to remove them until they've had at least a few hours to explore all possibilities. If you're looking for a very different experience of London, mixing history with spine-chilling terror, then the London Dungeon is definitely for you. Surprisingly, children seem to adore this ghoulish presentation, although it has to be said that this is not an attraction for the faint-hearted or the squeamish. Located on Tooley Street, close to London Bridge, from the minute you walk in through the heavy ancient doors, the atmosphere is dark and promisingly frightening. Almost every bloodthirsty event from British history has been recreated in ghastly detail. Human sacrifice, executions, plague, torture, witchcraft and murder all play their parts, and this truly is a macabre chamber of horrors. One of the best displays is the Jack the Ripper exhibition, which captures the dark mood of Victorian Whitechapel, where these horrific and as yet unsolved murders took place back in the autumn of 1888. The sights, sounds and even the smells are horribly realistic, reminding all who pass this way of a time when nobody wanted to walk the streets of London after dark. Should you have the time, however, it's well worth making a short detour to Whitechapel, where there are a number of guided Jack the Ripper walks that you can take to see where the grisly murders were committed, and some folk even claim to have encountered the ghosts of the victims and Jack himself. The Ten Bells pub is a popular starting point, where the names of the unfortunate women are commemorated, and you can take a measure of Dutch courage before venturing out into the unknown. Just a short distance from the London Dungeon, there's another rather gruesome reminder of ages past at the old operating theatre museum and Herb Garret, which authentically charts aspects of the development of medicine and surgery. As you stand in the observation gallery, the true implications of early surgical operations are alarmingly real. Patients would have been blindfolded, gagged and bound to the wooden operating table that you see before you. The blood was caught in the box of sawdust that you can still spot if you look carefully. And certainly, before the advent of anaesthetics and disinfectant, few folk ever survived the surgical experience to tell the tale. To try and see London all in one go is certainly unrealistic, and you can visit many, many times before you begin to feel that you know this wonderful city. Also, as been mentioned earlier, the view of London that you'll get at different times of the year varies quite dramatically. The Oxford Street stores and Harrods are stunningly beautiful at Christmas time, with spring turning the Mall and the royal parks into a mass of blossom and colour. Summer will bring a cosmopolitan mix of tourists, with every nationality imaginable represented, and as the leaves start to turn autumnal, there's a golden glow to London, and a much less frenetic pace of life for visitors and native city dwellers alike. As well as changing with the seasons, London is constantly growing and developing, with new structures appearing quite regularly to grace the London landscape and skyline. The most recent examples of this have included the much maligned Millennium Dome, which was an attraction created to operate throughout the year 2000 to mark the auspicious dawn of the 21st century. It was never intended that it should continue as a public exhibition beyond the year 2000, and how long the actual structure will remain is difficult to predict. However, there is another equally spectacular attraction that was built to celebrate the millennium that is most definitely here to stay. This is the magnificent London Eye, at 443 feet in height, the largest observation wheel in the world. A major work of engineering, the London Eye has been installed along the South Bank, and the views across London are simply breathtaking, even on a rainy day. Described as a flight, the 30-minute ride takes place within enclosed passenger capsules, so visitors are not exposed to the elements in any way, shape or form. Perhaps this isn't an ideal attraction for anyone who suffers from vertigo or claustrophobia, and anyone unfortunate enough to be afflicted by both should perhaps seriously think about saving their money and giving what might well be their worst nightmare a miss. However, people who have controlled their anxieties and given the Eye a try have found the ride remarkably stable, and the light, airy atmosphere inside the capsules very pleasant indeed. If you do get the chance to wait for a fine day for your ride, you'll get a much better view of everything, but even in damp and dismal conditions, the whole experience is pretty spectacular. It's worth mentioning here that it's possible to make a booking in advance for this attraction, as otherwise the queuing can be quite a long-winded affair. With the Millennium Dome and the London Eye, we've taken a brief glimpse at the 21st century and beyond for London. But for now, this whistle-stop guide has been packed with information that will undoubtedly help you to make the most of every location featured. Also, just because an attraction hasn't been included, it doesn't mean that it's not worthy of your attention. London's a very big place. What's more, there are a whole range of sites to visit all around London, so it's best to view this guide as a starting point and let the magical allure of this great city lead you onto explorations of your own making. At the beginning of this programme, Dr. Johnson's view that if a man was tired of London, he was tired of life seemed a very valid assumption. And at the end of this programme, you'll hopefully agree that the case has been proven beyond all possible doubt.